Hey, welcome back. So since I have some free time, I figured I could make this video just a quick, brief overview of a bike that you probably haven't seen much or haven't uploaded much of other than in some of those shorts recently. But this is the 2023 KTM 450 XCF. I won't go deep into the details of what I've done to the bike necessarily. It hasn't really been much. It's mainly just cosmetic, but I will kind of briefly go over all of the parts as quick as I can, and I'll try to give a brief explanation of what some of the parts do or the benefits for those who aren't familiar. So I'm going to try to go through this briefly and try not to linger on anything for too long. But just kind of a quick overview for those who aren't familiar with KTM. The XCF is the cross-country variant that kind of roots from KTM's SXF, which is their motocross, supercross variant of this bike. So with this bike, this isn't a enduro bike. This is, again, cross-country, and a cross-country and enduro in the US is more so kind of like sprints or GNCCs or hare scrambles. If you've heard those kind of mentioned before, that's what this bike is built for. So I'll just kind of go over some of the parts, and in another video I'll go over why I chose KTM and things like that. But anyway, I'll just go ahead and start at the front here. So one of the things that you can't see, but probably one of my favorite upgrades, is these are the stock tires on the bike, which are fine, but I ride in very rocky terrain with sharp rocks and very brutal edges. So outside of what you see on the outside, on the inside of this tire, instead of having your standard inner tube on a dirt bike tire, this actually has a Nitro bib mousse installed. And what the bib mousse does is it's a piece of foam that's injected with nitrogen, and those little nitrogen bubbles, when it's injected, form these little pockets of air, and these pockets of air kind of act the same as if you had a traditional tube inside of a tire, but it's impossible to get a puncture. Now, the downside of having the bib mousse, because I have it in the front and rear, is it's not really much of a downside, but you won't get that same feeling that you would get from having a tube in the tire. Now, these do come in different kind of firmness options, and which I have currently in the front. I have the softest option, which I believe is between 8 and 6 psi, and in the rear I have the more firm option, just because there was a backlog of parts. So the only thing I did have to do was drill out that mousse, and I'll go over that in details for any of you that would like to know more about how to do that. But for now, just know that that's a firmer mousse in the rear, and that's a softer mousse in the front. And going up from there, while I'm here, this guard here you see is just the Swingarm Guard. These are very inexpensive. I think they were like 20 bucks or something like that for both, a pair of them. I have it zip tied on here, as you can see, and the zip tie has not moved, and these have done their job. You can see it's kind of scuffed and scratched up there, and it's done its job protecting the bike and doing everything that it needs to do. The frame guards come standard on the KTM, so I didn't add that there. That comes from the factory. Jumping back up to the front, you have the disc guard, and for those who aren't aware of what this is for, outside of keeping debris and things like that away from your rotor and pads, this is primarily to keep your front disc from taking any hard hits from any large rocks or kind of getting bent in a rut or something like that. This offers just the protection. So say your front wheel drops down, you don't have to worry about your front rotor getting bent, because if it bends, then that can cause it, worst case, to not spin. But usually the more common thing is you'll get kind of a slightly warped rotor, and then what that will do is it will drag unevenly and just cause excess wear, and in some cases, just put more load on the engine and things like that. So I recommend these unless you're running an oversized rotor, where you can't find some type of fitment, or if you're really worried about heat and just weight. But I think it's just kind of a necessity. Jumping lower, you see here, these are the bottom of the forks. You have these protectors, and these just really help. These do a really good job of keeping kind of the same thing that the rotor guard will do. If you drop down to a rut or something like that, you have this protection on the side, and it's really important on the other side because you have your you have your adjusters underneath for your suspension. So you really don't want to tear those knobs off, because then you would have to replace even more expensive components. The skid plate is standard and stock, comes with the bike from the factory. The only thing that doesn't, which I wish did, is this extension that you see here. This I added on there, and this really helps out for if you are trying to do log crossings or rocks or just need extra protection. This is almost also a necessity if you're planning on doing any off-road riding, because it's it might be a little expensive for some, but this makes a big difference in protecting your bike and keeping your suspension linkage protected, and also just makes it a lot easier to slide over things if you get hung up at the top of a, a dirt pile or a log or rocks or something like that. So very useful. Going back to the front here, these kind of black sleeves that you see on here, these are actually seal savers. Now I know that there are those online who will say that, I would never run these, and they'll say that they've had, seals rust, or they've had just so much condensation build that it's kind of eaten away at the enamel. And I've never had any of that occur on running these sleeves on any bikes that I have. All these do, the purpose of these is you have these stanchions here, they collect a lot of dust, dirt, mud, and things like that. And oftentimes when you hear about someone blowing the seals on their fork, it's usually most of the time due to dirt and debris getting in. But all this does is this acts as a little external dust cover, so when it goes up and down, it kind of wipes the fork clean, and it also keeps mud and things like that from caking up around here on your stanchions and getting into your fork assembly. So I think that's a good upgrade, and in order to install this on one of the forks, you can just slip it over from the bottom if you kind of stretch it out a bit, but the easier way to do it is just to slide your forks down and slip the sleeve over the top. Or if you'd like the easiest option, you can get the ones that come with a zipper on the back, but I don't like those because they look a little bulky. So as long as these are zip tied in place, these aren't going to go anywhere. The suspension has bottomed out over some jumps and whatnot, and they have not moved, so that's another one of those upgrades that I recommend. Jumping up a little bit higher on the bike on this side, we'll go to the radiator guards. So if you look at these for a glance, they look like the radiator shrouds, and the radiator shrouds, help increase airflow and also keep debris from building up directly against your radiator. But the stock ones that come on the bike are plastic, so I figured I would replace these with the Flow radiator braces. I've ran the full type cage that kind of fully surround the radiator in the past, but I like these a lot better because they stick out just enough to protect the radiator. In fact, I've gone down with these on at speed, and most of your impacts are either going to come from the side, from a tip over, or kind of from a forward side impact, and these are very strong. They did their job. The first thing I worried about as soon as I went down was, oh my gosh, I hope I didn't tweak my radiator or puncture my radiator, and these held up fine. When I get to the other side, I'll show the fan that I have mounted on there and how these don't interfere with it at all, but I really suggest these. Okay, jumping up higher here, we have the Cycra Handguards. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. I don't think I've ever known if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Anyway, so these handguards I really like because you have the full wraparound hand protection. The ones that come stock on these bikes are the kind of soft ones that mount onto your clutch and master cylinder assembly, which I'm really not a big fan of, and I had these guards, but I didn't have the time to put them on, and I was riding without them. And this is an example why you would want to run these types of hand guards. So the other one's attached here, and this black piece is actually a piece from those previous ones. And you see this scratch here, so the bike I came off the bike at a little bit of speed, and it tipped over. And since this handguard was attached to the master cylinder, when it fell, the force snapped this bracket here. I don't know if you can see that there. So it snapped this bracket here. Since this is a cast piece, it's not forged, it's not very strong, or at least in that case it wasn't. So this snapped. Thankfully, it was this top piece, because if it wasn't for that, then that means that I would have to replace this entire bracket, because this part's removable, but the bottom part is one solid piece. So that is why I like to run these types of handguards, because there's no attachment to here. You can go down. Yes, this can still hit here, but this is completely separate. The only downside with running these full wraparounds, and why you might see some guys in sprint enduros and stuff like that just kind of run the loose ones that have no barrier on the side, is because it really allows you to kind of hug around the tree a little bit more. You can kind of have your arm here, and it'll just kind of the branches or whatever, or if you're running really close to a tree, you can just let it hug and it'll flex back. But with these, you don't get that flex. So these, you have to be a little bit more aware, because if you hit on a branch or something like that, if it's a certain diameter, it's going to have a bit of force and kind of grab you in that direction. So that's another thing to be mindful of. The second thing while I'm up here are the grip donuts. These are very inexpensive, but these do a good job of preventing you from getting blisters. As you can see, it just kind of rides right there. And these are usually only like $3 or $4, and you can just put them on, and they make a big difference comfort-wise and preventing blisters. The only last thing that I will mention while I'm up here on these handguards is they do come with a solid insert. So if you're riding in muddy or wet terrain, these can be blocked off, or in cooler weather, and help prevent any debris from getting through there, or any water or anything like that. Since I'm up here, I'll stay up here and then I'll work back down. But coming from the top here, if you can see, I'll go underneath. If you can see here, these are fork bleeders. So the purpose of these fork bleeders is just to release any excess built-up air that builds up in the top of the fork chambers, and doing so will kind of help you have a little bit smoother and more predictable ride within the suspension, because as you do ride, the suspension is going up and down so many thousands of times, and you get pressure that builds up within the fork, and it needs to be released somewhere. So that's what these quick release are. Normally on the top of the fork, if you're looking at your own bike and don't have these, it will just be a hex screw here, and you just loosen that hex screw slowly. That way it doesn't just kind of the air pressure doesn't blow your screw away if it's kind of dangling on the end of the screwdriver or wrench. But you just slowly back it out, and you'll hear a little bit of pressure release, and then you just tighten it back in. I do that on a stand. It just makes it easier, and then you just tighten it back down. But with these, when I'm done or in the middle of a ride or stop to get gas or something else, sometimes I'll put it up on the stand, just hold these for a few seconds. You'll hear the air pressure kind of seep out. Sometimes you won't, and that's it. Okay, so looking head on at the bike, some of you may look at these bars and go, wow, those bars look really tall, and they are. These are bar risers that I have installed here, the Enduro Engineering bar risers. What these do is they just kind of allow the bars to sit up a little bit taller, and since I'm a taller rider, they make it a lot more comfortable. But one thing to note if you are going to install any bar risers is that when you increase the height of your bars, you are not only changing the geometry of your body, but also the geometry of the bike and how it handles. So as you increase the height of your bar risers, you are now taking more weight off of the front end of the bike. So the front end will feel a lot lighter than normal and a lot less stable. So that's one thing to factor in, because as you're raising, again, you're taking that weight off. So your handling is going to feel a little bit different, and it might not seem like much, but millimeters do make a difference, and this is a large difference. I think this might be around 25 to 30 millimeters, which they don't recommend going beyond. But for me, that's why I haven't really been posting that much videos of this bike, because I've needed these bar risers to make it a lot more comfortable. And now that I have them on, I can spend more time riding this bike and less time hunched over, because it really does change how you approach certain things. If you approach a log or something like that and you're really hunched over and kind of crammed on the bike, it doesn't allow you to respond as well or just kind of maneuver as well as someone who may be a little bit more fitted to the bike, where they have more space on the bike than a taller rider. So if you're thinking about bar risers for the KTMs, just be mindful of the shape of the ones that you're getting to make sure that they match for your bars. There's different size. They have rectangular shapes, but these circular shapes are what are for this bar that is on this bike, and these are the stock bars. And one thing I'll also mention while I'm here is that if you're running these hand guards, they will mount to the stock bracket that comes with the handlebars on your bike, but be mindful that they don't go, the screws supplied don't go very deep if you're running these. In here, they don't go very deep into the thread, so you might want to get some bolts that are maybe a few millimeters longer, but it's not necessary, but it does ensure that you get a better fitment into the bar and tightness. So now that the bike has turned around to the opposite side, I know, just try not to look at that and that, those two scratches there. So these things happened before I had the protection on the bike, which is really frustrating. I hate to have anything in this bad of condition. That's just my personal opinion. But there was nothing I can do there. I ride in a very rocky, steep, and tight area, so the bike tipped over and scratched the exhaust, and since it's black paint on a silver exhaust, of course you're going to see it. I'm not proud of that, and I'm also not proud of the fact that I don't have any case guards on here, which have rubbed the black paint off of the case there. Up top, you can see that I have the Pro Carbon header guard, and this is just intended to keep any things like if you're doing any log crossings or anything like that, or if you're riding with other people, maybe a rock can get roosted at you and dent your header. This just does a good job of protecting it. It wraps around and goes underneath, and that's just one of those nice modifications, because the biggest thing it also does is it keeps your pants from melting on the exhaust, because these bikes run very hot. So anything coming out through these headers and going through the rear is just going to be very hot, and you run the risk of burning your pants or something like that, or even worse, your skin. So this just helps reduce that. It will still get hot, but it doesn't deform or anything like that. They're built for that, and they have some aluminum shielding on the side of it, so that works out good. While I'm in this area, this is an oversized brake pedal, rear brake pedal. I like that since I have a little bit bigger of a boot. That makes it a lot easier to fill that rear brake, and these I'll put the links and everything or in the description of what all these pieces are, but these are kind of an off-brand version that was relatively inexpensive. And same with these foot pegs here. You can actually see the brand there. This is the same manufacturer that makes the brake pedals. I haven't had any issue with this brand. These foot pegs I really like. They allow you, this back piece here allows you to get more weight on the rear towards your heels, so that way it's a little less strain on your Achilles and things like that, and helps prevent injury. So you can really lean back and get your weight back on the seat, which is very nice, and I like that there. You can see the Swingarm Guard on this side, and you can also see the rear disc guard. Now the rear disc guard is almost more important than the front disc guard that I showed earlier, because if you're going to drop doing any type of technical riding or anything like that, this rear wheel will drop down into ruts or over logs or in between kind of a V of rocks, and it's going to hit. And as you can see, this has taken many dents and dings, hard hits, and I have had no issues. It's done its job. It hasn't moved, and that's what it's built for. You're not intentionally trying to go out and damage anything, but it's nice to know that you have this piece back here that makes your bike a little bit more bulletproof. So that's pretty much it down below. Jumping up a little bit higher, you can see the fan that I have on here. During the time when I was doing this, there was no fan kit available or fan kit in development for the 450 XEF in 2023. They've come out with kits then, but there was nothing then, and I was having really bad issues with this bike overheating. Again, this is the cross-country variant, and you would think that it would do a little bit better on the slower and more technical, but it just runs way too hot, so the bike would boil over, and I'll kind of go over a little bit more of that in a second. But I just want to finish up on the rear here. This is the Tusk grab handle. This isn't really necessary, but what I do like about this handle is that it's right perfectly for if you're trying to get your bike off the stand, or it's really helpful for if you're on a hill climb and kind of get hung up. You can kind of use this to lean the bike against the hill or pick it up like that. But the only thing that I don't like is, as you can see here, after a long day of riding, when you go to pick your bike up, it's just so thin that it just digs right into those joints, which when you've been holding on to the bike all day, it really starts to wear on your finger joints and things like that. So yeah. Okay, so jumping back to the cooling system, I I have this fan installed again. I just kind of found my own fan online, and I did a little bit of research on, or kind of brainstorming on what I could build to make this work. So as you can see, this looks factory. It looks like it comes like that, but I actually made my own mount for that fan. And again, this was before they came out with a fan kit for this year of bike. But so what I did was I made my own switch. I don't know if you can see that there, but I made my own switch, and this is the push button switch that runs to the battery, and I have a fuse, and all I have to do is just press that there, and that's it. So it works great for everything that I need it to do. Since I've put that on, that is probably the single best upgrade that I've done to the bike. The bike no longer boils over, and I have engine ice coolant inside of the radiators, and ever since then it can be 100 degrees day out while I'm riding and no boiling over. I can now stop. I don't have to try to rush through sections, because that's what I would always do when you're riding anything that's not geared for enduro and slow and have the cooling for the type of slower pace riding or just tight sections. Even if you are riding quicker pace stuff, the bikes get so hot and you're just worried about, oh shoot, let me get this thing going so I can get air moving through the radiator. You know, just like if you're in a car that overheats, or you just want to get air moving through that radiator. So having this fan on there allows you to take more time and not be in such a rush. And it's really one of the biggest upgrades that I recommend doing to any bike, really, unless you're just that worried about weight. It will help the engine in the long run and its longevity, and it will run at cooler temps and won't be so stressed and be less wearing on the components. So the last thing that I'll mention here, and also one of my favorite upgrades, is the seat. This is a KTM OEM part that you can buy from their catalog. They have it in different colors. They had a black, blue, but I decided to go with orange. I think it was just a nice pop of color. I have to say that this seat is very well made. The rubberized grip on it feels very good. I've had no tearing at the stitching. And for those of you who aren't familiar, this purpose of this ribbing on the seat is to keep you from sliding back. And I know it might not seem like that big of a deal, but when you're on these bikes, they have so much power now, or any bike, and you're doing any type of hill climbing or technical terrain, or you really like to stay planted in your riding position, this allows you to just kind of sit and you stay in place. There is no more sliding off the seat or anything like that, and you can just focus more on your riding. And if you're taller, I'm sure you're familiar with when you're going up hill climbs, trying to pull yourself back up the seat to get back up to that front end, and it just adds more fatigue. So doing that makes a big difference. So the last thing I'll mention is a little bit of the technology that these bikes come equipped with now. So you have a quick shifter, you have traction control, and you have 2 different power maps, personally, and a launch mode. Personally, for me, I didn't like the quick shifter, because in order to use the quick shifter, it throws my brain off too much going between street and dirt. Is that for the quick shifter, with quick shifters, you want to use them with the throttle open and not closing or any hesitation in the throttle. But that's really hard on the dirt if you're doing any type of enduro riding or anything like that, because it's just not stable. So I found that the shifter would kind of get hung up because it thinks that you're trying to shift with the clutch even though you're not touching the lever. So I just decided not to use that. But the thing that I do use, which I know some of you may really not like, and at first I wasn't a fan of before I got it, which is traction control. I used to think that, traction control, what would I need that for on a dirt bike? If I'm here to ride the dirt bike, I should know how to ride and how to apply the power. As great as that sounds, you're just not going to, in all cases, apply the power more efficiently than the bike will. The traction controls come a long ways. No, it's not as good as on the road, just because road conditions are easier to monitor than dirt conditions. But there's so many times where if I put this bike in traction control, with traction control on, it's such subtle differences. It doesn't hang up the wheel if you want to pop it over a log or something like that. It doesn't interfere with wheeling or anything like that. What it does is when you're coming through those really muddy, rooted, rotted out sections, slippery, shell rock or beyond, it really helps you just get the power down more efficiently and spin the wheel less, which actually ends up reducing the cost and increases the longevity of your rear wheel. So it's kind of a win-win. It might not be for everyone, but you don't notice it. It's it's just one of those things where once you have it on, I couldn't tell you when it is and when it is not kicking in. There are some times where I do want that wheel spin, just like in a car or a motorcycle, where you want it to power through that section, just power slide and just kind of have a little fun and hang out there. Then that's when you would want to turn it off. But other than that, if you're worried about lap times, going faster or whatever you may be trying to be, traction control is probably your best bet. And I'm pretty sure that any professional team out there probably has their own proprietary traction control, which is helping them put the power down more efficiently. But anyway, I hope that was brief enough for some of you. That's all of the upgrades that I've done to this bike. Engine-wise, it's stock, and I apologize for the condition that the bike is in right now. It doesn't look the best, but just know that this thing gets ridden hard, and I'll be putting up more and more footage of this bike, and hope to continue sharing some of the experiences that I have with some of you. So let me know if you have any questions. Leave a comment. I appreciate those of you who have made it here. If you've made it this far in the video, I especially appreciate it. All of you that have made your way here, you've made your way here organically. I don't advertise this channel. I don't share it anywhere. Most of the people that I know don't even know that I have a YouTube channel and upload any videos like this. So if you made it here, I appreciate it and look forward to continuing putting these videos out. Anyway, stay safe out there.